Professor Danta, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor Dewaele.
Good afternoon.
Guest also has joined, I think.
Hello, Professor Dewaele.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Professor Dewaele. Can you hear me? Pleasure to meet you.
Sir, I got worried a little because I sent you a mail yesterday and a reminder in the morning, here in the morning. And then I just got worried because I was waiting for the flight. Thank God, right? You are here. So good to see you after 7 years, maybe 9 years.
Nice to see you.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I received your mail this morning, Professor Dewaele. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, we have with us Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele, and we have a senior faculty of the department, Professor Bijoy Danta is here. Right?
Hello, Professor Dewaele.
Yes. Then
nice to meet you.
Head of the
So
department.
happy to see you here. Welcome to the department.
And we have Professor Gautam Kumar Bora. He's the head of the department of English here.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Great pleasure to have you in the department. Welcome.
Sir, should we start?
Is VC joining?
Yeah, he says he will be here at around 3:30. Yes.
We still have 3 minutes actually, so
Let us wait for a while.
yeah, we should start at 3:30, sir.
Yes.
That would be better.
Yes.
We still have 3 minutes to go.
He's still in a meeting, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Better we can start at 3:30. He will join. Is that it?
Yes.
That's
Sir.
okay.
Right.
That's how I think we should. Yeah.
We have given him the schedule, and I talked to him in the morning also.
Yeah.
Said he will be around 3:30.
Okay, that's all right.
I'm trying to find out how I will share my screen. Can I just check whether it works?
Yes.
Please do, please.
Yeah, please. Oh, sir has joined. Welcome, sir.
Sir, yes, sir. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Danta.
No, he's.
Sir,
Is this working?
yes,
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's working.
Good.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah,
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Professor.
I tried to contact you, but I was given to understand that you're in a meeting.
Yeah, there was meeting with the ministry officials, right? Yeah. Anyway, so I'm
invite you.
yes.
Thank you. Anyway, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody here in India. Good afternoon, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Tezpur University. And good morning, Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele. Welcome to the distinguished lecture series of our department. Right, we have a very distinguished speaker amongst us today. Before we begin the speech, Professor Gautam Kumar Bora, head of the Department of English of our university, I request him to welcome the guest to talk.
Okay, thank you, Bharat. Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tezpur University, Professor V.K. Jain, esteemed guest speaker, Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele from Birbeck, University of London, UK, my esteemed colleagues and my dear students. I welcome you all to this special event, the 5th lecture on the year's distinguished lecture series organized by the department. We're extremely thankful to Honorable Vice Chancellor for gladly accepting our invitation to this program despite his heavy schedule. We feel privileged to have his gracious presence as chief guest at this event as an active support to our endeavor. Thank you, sir. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele from Birbeck, London University, UK. On behalf of the department, I extend Professor Dewaele a warm welcome once more. The department is deeply honored by your gracious presence and your generous acceptance of our request to deliver a talk as part of our distinguished speaker series. Tezpur University was established only in 1994, but within this relatively short span of time, it has emerged as one of the premier institutes of higher education in the country. In 2016, it received the Visitor's Best University Award. This department was opened the same year, and during the last 25 years, it has made a steady growth to become a prestigious department of English, ELT, and linguistic studies in the country. Professor Dewaele is going to talk about an emerging area of research in the field of foreign language, learning and teaching, which is triggered by the introduction of positive psychology. An internationally acclaimed researcher in the field of second language acquisition, Professor Dewaele has published very widely on the linguistic, pragmatic, and socio-cultural challenges that multilinguals face in communicating and recognizing emotions in different contexts. He was the former president of the International Association of Multilingualism and the European Second Language Association. Currently, he is the general editor of the Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development. He won the Equality and Diversity Research Award from the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy, that was 2013, and the Robert Gardner Award for Excellence in Second Language and Bilingualism Research from the International Association of Language and Social Psychology in 2016. Professor Dewaele's talk will focus on the role of emotions in foreign language learning and teaching beyond established concepts like foreign language anxiety and constructs like motivation and attitudes towards the foreign language. This talk has a primary relevance to ELT in our context, but I'm confident that it will bring real benefits to all of us as it will focus on the latest research on an important aspect of the classroom. Let me also take this opportunity to thank my colleague, Dr. Sarat Dole, for his initiative as convener of this distinguished lecture to be given by Professor Dewaele. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gaurang. We are very glad to have Professor B.K. Jain, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tezpur University, as the chief guest of this talk. In spite of his extremely hectic schedule, he has agreed to address the audience of this talk. I, on behalf of the department, request Honorable B.C. sir to encourage us with, a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Dole. Professor Bora, the head of the English department, and Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele, Professor Vijay Danta, who was earlier the HOD of the English department up until very recently, and all the distinguished faculty members of English department, and other faculty members who are from other schools who have joined this very important lecture from Professor Dewaele. I'm not an expert by any stretch of imagination in arts and humanities or in the field of languages. But I would say one thing, that the national education policy, which has recently been introduced in the country, it does talk about a set of competencies which are supposed to be provided to all the graduating students from the university system or from the higher education system. The other day, just a few days back, the Honorable Minister of Education of the Government of India did stress upon the need to learn foreign languages. Because if you want to truly be a global citizen and you want to communicate effectively with the rest of the world, I think it's important that we develop competencies or proficiencies in the foreign languages too. The the topic is so interesting for some of us. These emotions in foreign language teaching in the classrooms. I would just refrain from giving a big speech, but just a couple of points. The other day when there was some seminar on the language teaching, I think in our very university, it was mentioned that the language teaching is in the classroom involves external stimuli, right? So external stimuli, and then you have your cognitive domains stimulated, and then you assimilate whatever is being taught to you in the class. But in the case of foreign languages, in fact, these competencies or the proficiency, those are developed over a period of time. It's a very gradual process. And so in the initial stages, and in fact, up until time you develop considerable expertise in foreign languages, you always have this quote unquote, this communication apprehension. And that inhibits you many times to express yourself in an effective manner. Perhaps in the case of written communication, that problem is not so much, but certainly in the case of verbal communication, some of these inhibitions, the shyness, the fear factor, the anxiety, and everything comes to the fore. And this is mainly, because I myself, when I was learning, the foreign English as a foreign language, I did go through all these range of emotions, and especially when I studied, Professor Dewaele, I studied at Sussex University. Okay, yeah, and back then in 1975, my English, I didn't have any proficiency, so to speak. So it used to be quite a task for me to express myself. I used to feel timid, I used to feel shy, I used to feel inhibited when I used to express myself in any seminar. So much so that, I did have this terrible fear of even how would I ask a question in a seminar? Even if I didn't understand something and I wanted some clarification from a professor, I would tend to sort of refrain from asking the relevant questions. So I think today when Professor Dewaele does speak on these range of emotions in the classroom teaching, specifically in the context of the foreign languages, I think it's going to be quite a useful talk. Yes, there are ways of getting over these apprehensions, and I'm sure she's going to talk about those for effective foreign language teaching. But I would hope that in our university, all the students, whether they are from engineering stream or from social science stream or science stream, they all must attend some course in foreign language and acquire certain set of competencies, because as the honorable minister was saying, that this is one set of competencies which every student must have. And to that extent, I'm sure today's talk is going to be extremely useful, not only for the students, but also for the practitioners or rather in this profession of teaching, all the young teachers and the senior teachers alike. So with these few words, I welcome Professor Dewaele for this talk. And Professor Dewaele, if you can come in person, we would really appreciate if you could find some time, maybe in not too distant future. We would be very happy to have you on our campus. And it's a lovely green campus, like maybe Sussex. I will not necessarily say that it is better than Sussex. Sussex was also a very beautiful campus in the rural setting, lush green. And our campus is very similar to that. Let me say it with a lot of sincerity. It's a lovely campus. There is a very dedicated set of teachers in this university. You will have a very positive feel if you decide to come to our campus in future at some stage. Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Dewaele, Professor Bora, and Professor Datta for giving me this opportunity to listen to Professor Dewaele. Thank you so much.
Sarath, you are muted. Sarath, you are muted. Please just unmute yourself for a second.
Thank you, sir. Now you're ready to hear Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele. The stage is yours, sir. So you can, speak, present whatever you like, sir.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's in fact my very first presentation in India. It's a virtual one. I hope that one day I may be there in person. But I find it absolutely wonderful to be able to talk to colleagues across the world about things that matter to us all. And I think India is in fact a particularly interesting country to do linguistics in, because you are probably one of the most multilingual countries in the world, and hence you face challenges that are pretty steep, I would say, certainly compared to some European countries where we do have a couple of languages, but nothing compared to what you have. I'm going to talk about emotions in foreign language classes. I did see on the advertisement that you had included a quote of my research on swearing. I wasn't going to talk about swearing, in fact, but since you did put in that quote, I decided that I would speak a little bit about the issues about communicating emotions in a foreign language. And being Belgian, having been brought up with French as a first language, Dutch as a second first language, I learned English at school, age 14, Spanish, age 18. I've been living in London for 27 years, yet the moment I open my mouth, British people can tell straight away that I'm not local. And so they would ask me, oh, where are you from? And I say, oh, from London, if I'm walking outside of London. And then they smile and they say, yes, but where are you really from? And I understand that, there is no evil intention behind it. People are just curious and they hear a foreign accent and they want to know where you come from. So I said, well, in fact, I'm Belgian. And say, oh, Belgium. And then it used to be a nicer question before Brexit. After Brexit, in fact, I would say that the whole atmosphere has turned more against people with foreign accents. And that is something we have witnessed in the UK, although slightly less frequently in London. So let me share my screen and get started with the talk. So is this visible to you all? Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. So as I explained, there will be two parts in my talk. The first part will be slightly shorter than the second part. I will focus on the research I did on communicating emotions in a foreign language and hence talk about pragmatics. And then the second part of the talk will be on the experience of emotions in the foreign language classroom. So I'll talk more specifically about the psychology of foreign language learning. So let me start with defining some crucial concepts here. Social pragmatic and pragmatic competence, which refers to the social perceptions underlying participants' interpretation and performance of communicative action. So it means that when you follow an interaction, you are able, in fact, to realize that maybe something is missing in that interaction, that thanks would have been expected, and that the absence of thanks might be meaningful. And so you need to have that social pragmatic competence to understand how to interpret what it is you hear or what you don't hear. And then pragmatic competence, more specifically, is knowing what linguistic resources exist in a language to realize particular elocutions, knowledge of sequential aspects of speech act, so you know what comes before what, and finally, knowledge of the appropriate contextual use of particular languages, linguistic resources. And I would claim that this is probably, in fact, the hardest aspect in the acquisition of a foreign language. And it certainly took me some time, even after arriving in London, before I mastered the social pragmatics of British academic interactions, which is quite different from what I was used to in French and in Dutch back in Belgium. Also, since I'm going to talk about emotions, it's crucial to explain where I stand. I use the so-called integrative constructionist approach. I refer to the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, and I strongly recommend the book that you see there on the right, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, an absolutely fascinating book. And her point is that emotions are non-specific constructions of the mind shaped in the course of socialization. So obviously culture plays a role in the construction of emotion concepts. So she is strongly against the view that emotions are universal and that there are just 6 universal emotions. She says that the only thing that is universal about emotions are the fact that you have 2 dimensions, one of valence, one of arousal. So going from positive to negative is the valence dimension. Going from non-active to highly active is the arousal dimension. So for her, emotions are not universal entities. They are just instances that people construct based on their past emotional experiences and predictions, and hence emotions have no unique fingerprint. And that is really a crucial point. The fact that somebody smiles does not imply that that person is feeling happy. The fact that that person seems to be frowning does not mean that that person is unhappy or angry. One can experience multiple emotions simultaneously, and they can be expressed in very different ways. So if somebody is angry, the anger can be icy cold anger with a low voice, or it can be very loud anger with a very loud voice and with a lot of body movement. So it is not, I would say that catching emotions is a pretty daunting task. I've been working on this with a good friend, Aneta Pavlenko, since the early 2000s, and we both published a book based on the data we collected through a bilingualism and emotion questionnaire. Also, more recently, Pia Resnick, an Austrian researcher, has continued to work in this tradition. And also I published a book on this in 2010, using, in fact, a self-portrait of my grandfather for the cover. Now, communicating emotions is something that is of vital importance to human beings. And here this American psychologist, Fussell, explains that it is talking about how you feel is fundamental to everyday and clinical interactions. Affective experiences are frequent topics of everyday conversations, and how well these emotions are expressed and understood is important to interpersonal relationships and individual well-being. Meaning that she was obviously not talking about foreign language acquisition or teaching. She was talking about first language interactions. But if you have to express how you feel in a foreign language, and you may struggle in being as sophisticated as your first language, that could in fact have an adverse effect on your well-being. So the work with Aneta was based on an online questionnaire, probably one of the very first in the field of applied linguistics. We collected data from more than 1,500 multilinguals, asked them about language perceptions, language choices for communication of feelings, anger, for swearing. Also, we collected data about self-perceived proficiency in up to 5 different languages. And we also collected data on foreign language anxiety. The general pattern that we discovered was that the first language of multilinguals was typically preferred for communication of emotion, and the first language was also typically felt to have the highest level of emotional resonance. So we looked for sources of variation in the data. We discovered that it was very much linked to a person's linguistic history, their present language use, and a number of social biographical variables. So for example, people who had started a foreign language, I refer to foreign languages as LX, an early onset of acquisition typically was linked to a higher use of that language later in life. Also, a foreign language acquired only through a classroom to classroom instruction was typically used less frequently later in life than languages that had been acquired naturalistically or in a mixed context. And then obviously, the more you use a foreign language, the more you are socialized in the foreign language, the bigger the network of interlocutors in that foreign language, the more likely you are going to be using that foreign language to express emotions. So this was the typical pattern that we discovered in the data. Our multilinguals reported significantly more use of the L1 for swearing, and as you see, gradually less for languages they had acquired later in life. And they also felt that their first language swear words were emotionally more powerful than those acquired in the second language, which then again were more powerful than those acquired in the third language, and you see it goes gradually down. Now, this was one of the last papers I wrote on swearing. This is the C word in English, which is absolutely taboo in UK interactions between, well, except of football stadiums, maybe. So I compared it to verbal dynamite, collected data from English first and English foreign language users. And I discovered that it is in fact a word that foreign language users of English, they don't quite understand what it means. And they typically underestimate just how offensive that word is. And then in fact, they don't use it very often. And even first language users don't use it very often because it is such a taboo word. In fact, it took me words to discover what the C word meant in English. And I remember asking a colleague of mine in the department and saying, you know, what would be the most offensive swear word in English, according to you? And he said, oh, that would be the C word. I said, C word? I have no idea what this is. And then he said, well, I couldn't possibly tell you, but it is C-U-N-T. And then I said, cunt, and he jumped. And I thought, wow, that really is a powerful word. So I learned something, and it took me years to find out. My most recent publication in that area is one where we looked at differences in emotional reactions of Greek and Hungarian foreign language users of English and we compared their reactions to watching television in English to the reactions of British users of English, so who had English as a first language. So we had a measure of emotional reactions that was based on an averaging scores of 4 different items: feeling emotional when watching the news, when watching films in English, laughing, watching a funny film, and trusting a news report in English. And what we discovered, as you see on the left of the screen, is the expected pattern, in the sense that the first language users of English reported stronger emotional reactions in English than the foreign language users of English. However, when comparing the 2 groups of foreign language users of English, we discovered that, in fact, the Greeks were not significantly different from the British first language users, but that the scores of the Hungarian foreign language users were much lower. And we linked that to the fact that in Greece, there is a long established tradition of teaching English at a high level in education, whereas in Hungary, the teaching of English really only developed after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the teachers of Russian suddenly had to become teachers of English. So the quality of the teaching was probably not as good as in Greece. And then there is a second probable explanation, namely that in Greece there is a long tradition of showing films in the original version on television and in cinemas with subtitles. Whereas in Hungary, like in many other countries, the films are dubbed, so there is much less opportunity to hear a film in the original version. So the Hungarians lagged behind the Greeks. So one of the intriguing questions then is why the first language feels more emotional than a later learned language. And Aneta looked this up, and she found that it could be linked to the affective linguistic conditioning in childhood. A child learns languages with full involvement of the limbic system and of emotional memory, whereas languages learned later in life in a classroom rely much more on declarative memory. They don't produce the strong responses of a language you learned in a naturalistic setting. So it can cause a feeling of detachment and disembodiment. However, if you fall in love in that foreign language, you can go through a process of secondary socialization, and it can dislodge the first language from its emotionally dominant position, which means that the strength of the first language is not a law of nature. It's more a law of averages when you look at lots of multilinguals who typically are still dominant in their first language. Now, in the introduction, it was mentioned that I obtained a prize from the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy. It was based on research I did with Beverly Costa, who is a psychotherapist, and who convinced me that the work on emotion should be extended to multilingualism in a therapeutic setting, especially because multilingual clients typically feel that their multilingualism is a crucial aspect of their sense of self and of the therapy, and that in fact a lot of psychotherapists are quite unaware about the importance of this multilingualism to understand their client, and hence that it is important to raise awareness among psychotherapists about this, especially when the client switches languages during therapy, typically something that happens when the emotional tone is raised, and that multilinguals may in fact code switch in and out of a language in order to gain proximity or distance themselves if they are talking about episodes of trauma or shame, And I have a paper with a former PhD student of mine, Sally Cook, that came out recently. The participants had been tortured in their home country and were refugees and were in London at the time of the interviews. So Diane says, the English language is my place of safety. In that sense of safety, it enables me to visit my pain. So Diane was not able to talk about the horrors that happened to her in her first language, but English allowed her to distance herself from the event and talk about it. Also, Bronte, who explains, expressing myself in English about things which happened to me which are horrible. I think I cut it out, that there is not much emotion towards it if I'm speaking in English, but if I was speaking in Luganda, there would be a lot of emotional attachment to it. In English, you don't feel it. So using that foreign language allows people who have suffered trauma to be able to talk about it. So that's the end of the social pragmatic aspect of my emotion talk. From now on, I'll talk about learner emotions in the foreign language class. And I was surprised that there was so little about it when I started becoming interested in this. The explanation is probably that the dominant perspective in second language acquisition, and it still is the dominant position, is that language learning is really a matter of biology, chemistry, and it's to do with the brain, not so much the heart. And hence, more interest in things like working memory or concepts like language aptitude, but very little about emotions. So Meryl Swain described them as the elephants in the room, and the situation is changing. Matthew Pryor said, yes, there is an elephant, but it's time to open the windows and start talking about learner emotions. There was, of course, some work on emotions, but it wasn't called emotion, it was called affect. It's a word that is still used, but less frequently these days. And Jane Arnold, for example, talked about affect in language learning and guest edited special issue on affect in foreign language learning. I myself made a little joke about elephants flying, having taken off. Looking at the Modern Language Journal, I discovered that there were only 7.6 papers on average per year that mentioned the word emotion, and then it was only about anxiety. But that number has gone up significantly in recent years. Also, before 2010, if they talked about emotion, it was typically about anxiety. So I've been calling for more research on psychological and emotional dimensions in instructed foreign language learning. And some colleagues agreed with that, like McIntyre and colleagues, who said that emotions are fundamentally important motivators, but the emotions were always hidden within the concept of motivation, except maybe anxiety. But if they didn't mention positive emotions, it was typically at item level rather than at dimensional level. And in a recent chapter with McIntyre, in fact, we did find that there was a strong connection between 10 positive and 10 negative emotions that learners had experienced a week in the previous week, that these were in fact linked to positive attitudes and motivation dimensions in the foreign language. So what caused the interest in positive emotions? I think it was linked to the sudden awareness of positive psychology, and it was thanks to a paper by Peter McIntyre and Tammy Gregerson. And I discovered about positive psychology, discovered that in fact I had been a positive psychologist without realizing that I was one. The aim is to focus on normal people rather than people with problems. And positive psychologists don't deny the existence of problems, but they also want to look at the positive aspects of a person's life. They look at three main pillars: positive subjective experience, positive individual traits, and positive institutions. And the broaden and build theory by Fredrickson is particularly useful for foreign language learning. Her basic point is that positive emotion facilitates the building of resources, because of positive emotion tends to broaden a person's perspective, opening an individual to absorb new information, whereas negative emotions, anxiety, has the opposite tendency. If you feel anxious, what you do, and we heard it earlier, your focus narrows, you feel threatened, you close the shutters, and that restricts the range of potential language input. Now, this is the paper I mentioned just earlier, McIntyre and Gregerson in 2012, who introduced positive psychology to the field of second language acquisition. Since then, we have had a number of books, special issues on positive psychology. I wrote an overview in Frontiers in Psychology in 2019. So I think we can really use the metaphor of the flowering of positive psychology in SLA. And in 2014, Peter McIntyre and myself published a paper that is one of our most cited papers these days, The Two Faces of Janus, where we argued that it was important to not just look at anxiety, but to also add a positive emotion, to have a more holistic take on the emotions of foreign language learners. And so we defined enjoyment as a complex, positively balanced emotion resulting from a combination of challenge and perceived ability that allows tackling difficult tasks. So we were inspired, in fact, by Saint-Mihai's concept of flow or optimal experience. And we developed an instrument with 21 items. Now we have just a paper that is going to come out with a short form of that original scale, where we tap into three factors or three lower order dimensions: teacher appreciation, personal enjoyment, social enjoyment. And you see there the 9 items that we are using in our current research. So reflecting how the learner feels about his or her class, about the teacher, and about the peers, because we realize that these, in the relationship between enjoyment and anxiety, we discovered a moderate negative correlation, which allowed us to argue that, in fact, these are independent dimensions. There is some overlap, but they are independent, meaning that one will go up. We also collected qualitative data, and we discovered that enjoyment was very much linked to empowering activities where students had a certain degree of autonomy, where they could be creative and they could bond with their classrooms. Also, being in a positive classroom environment was vital, receiving praise and encouragement from the teacher, but also from other people in the classroom. Humor, trust, and respect also were very frequently mentioned. So we looked into learner internal sources of enjoyment. We discovered that older learners, female learners, highly multilingual learners typically reported more enjoyment, and also people who were more advanced in their foreign language learning, who felt that they were above average in their classroom, who felt that they had achieved already a quite high level of proficiency, got good test results. All these were linked with high levels of enjoyment. And here is a typical graph. So you see when at low intermediate level, there is still more enjoyment than anxiety. But as the students develop on their language learning journey, then enjoyment goes up and anxiety drops. And I would claim that this pattern would probably apply to other skills that people can learn. It certainly describes how I felt when I started learning karate 20 years ago. At start, I enjoyed it, but I was also anxious of getting hurt and accidentally hurting somebody else. And then bit by bit, I became more confident and I became less anxious and started enjoying it more. And I think it applies to learning to play an instrument or rock climbing or different sports. Then it turned out there was also an effect of learner personality. Learners with high levels of cultural empathy typically reported high levels of enjoyment. The same for trait emotional intelligence. My Chinese colleagues Li and Xu carried out a positive psychology intervention in classrooms in China, and they discovered that in fact they could boost learners' emotional intelligence as well as their enjoyment and lower their anxiety. Other sources of enjoyment are positive attitudes towards the foreign language or the foreign language culture. We discovered also that it can depend on the teacher. If you have two teachers for the same language, well, typically you prefer the main teacher. There is an effect of school. So enjoyment can be higher in schools that pay a lot of attention to the foreign language. And there is an effect of society. So if the language being taught is one that is highly valued within that society, then levels of enjoyment in that foreign language will be higher and levels of anxiety will be lower. And then we discovered that, in fact, one of the main differences between enjoyment and anxiety was the role of the teacher. So we collected data from British high school students learning typically French as a foreign language, and we discovered that their high levels of enjoyment were linked to positive attitudes towards the foreign language, but also to the teacher, and the teacher being unpredictable in class, using the foreign language a lot in class, and also on the ability to speak a lot in class, as well as relative standing and stage of development. But so crucially, enjoyment seemed very much linked to the teacher, whereas anxiety was not at all linked to the teacher. So we concluded that the teacher, in fact, can do relatively little to make the anxiety of learners disappear. And here are a few graphs to show that pattern. Attitudes towards the teacher, the more positive the attitude towards the teacher, the higher the level of enjoyment in class, and this was a quite large effect. And also here, teachers who use the foreign language a lot, their students reported higher levels of enjoyment. I should add that the two schools where we collected the data were in fact elite schools. So I'm not claiming that we would find the same pattern for non-elite schools. And then I can't help myself, of course, being a proud dad. I published a couple of papers with my daughter who finished her degree in French and linguistics at Oxford 2 years ago. We were wondering whether enjoyment anxiety changes over time in high school. And we used a pseudo-longitudinal design. So in fact, we compared the scores of three age groups, the 12, 13-year-olds, 14, 15, and 16 to 18-year-olds. We discovered a slight dip in enjoyment for the 14 to 15-year-olds, probably linked to the fact that they have GC exams at that time and that teachers are very much teaching to prepare them for these national exams. And as you see, anxiety levels remained stable. However, the sources of enjoyment and anxiety changed over time, where enjoyment for the youngest group came from peers and anxiety from self, In the middle age group, enjoyment came from the teacher and anxiety still from the self. And then for the oldest age group, the enjoyment came from the teacher, but the anxiety came more from the peers and from reactions of peers on making errors and mistakes in the classroom. The same pattern emerged among Chinese EFL learners. You see the strongest predictor of enjoyment was the attitude towards the teacher, and the strongest predictor for anxiety was in fact the relative standing among peers, and attitudes towards the teacher had only a very limited effect on levels of anxiety. And then obviously also other teacher behaviors that contributed to enjoyment was teachers joking, teachers being friendly. The same pattern emerged then in a different study on 210 Spanish EFL learners, where teachers' friendliness was the strongest positive predictor of enjoyment, whereas the strength of the foreign accent was in fact a strong negative predictor of enjoyment. But we think that the strong foreign accent was probably a symptom of a relative low level of skill from the teacher, not necessarily just the accent. And then anxiety turned out to be higher with younger teachers, teachers who were very strict, and teachers who did not use the foreign language much in class. With Peter McIntyre then in 2019, we collected qualitative and quantitative data. We discovered that sources of anxiety were typically linked to the self of the student, whereas sources of enjoyment were typically the self in interaction with the teacher. So that again confirmed the importance of the teacher in causing enjoyment in the classroom. And this was again confirmed in a study with Chen Li on Chinese EFL students, where we discovered that teacher enthusiasm in fact had a direct effect on student engagement. So having an enthusiastic teacher means that the student will be more motivated and will engage more. And it also has an indirect effect, teacher enthusiasm, on student engagement through enjoyment. So an enthusiastic teacher will have students who enjoy themselves more, and students who enjoy themselves more will put more effort. They will, in the learning, they will be more engaged. Whereas there is a negative relationship between teacher enthusiasm and student boredom. So if your teacher is very enthusiastic, then as a student, you're typically not going to be bored. And it means if you're not bored, you will be more engaged. On the other hand, if your teacher lacks enthusiasm, you will be bored and your engagement levels will be lower. And then in a paper that is currently under submission, we adopted a longitudinal design. We looked at how enjoyment, anxiety, and motivation and attitudes changed over the course of a semester. So we had 4 data collection points over one semester. The students were Kuwaiti students of foreign languages. Half of them studied English. Others studied languages like German, French, Spanish. We discovered that there was a slow decrease in enjoyment over time, specifically linked to students who reported that their teachers did not joke much, if at all. And you can see that in the bottom graph, that those teachers who joked very infrequently, that the drop in enjoyment was sharpest for them. We also found a positive link between teacher frequency of using the foreign language and enjoyment. Also frequency of joking linked to more enjoyment, higher motivation, lower anxiety. And then we discovered the reverse pattern of what we had expected, namely that enjoyment was linked to higher predictability in these Kuwaiti classrooms. So that was an unexpected finding. Now, why do emotions matter? For this, we need to refer to some meta-analysis in the field. So enjoyment, this is in fact a paper I'm still working on with Eloise Botes and Samuel Grive. There is a strong positive correlation between enjoyment and willingness to communicate. So if you enjoy the class, you're more likely to be willing to contribute to that class. So we have a relatively small number of studies there, but in the latest version of the paper, we have more data. We also discovered that there is a moderate negative correlation between anxiety and academic achievement. So students who are anxious typically don't do as well in their tests and exams. And there is a positive link between enjoyment and academic achievement, moderate positive link. Again, students who enjoy themselves in class are much more likely to get better results. So it really matters to have the right emotional atmosphere in the foreign language classroom. So here I'm reaching the end of my talk, which is about the pedagogical implications of this research. What is it that teachers can do, in fact, to control learners' anxiety, ward off their boredom and boost their enjoyment? Well, they can promote solidarity and trust, establish a good rapport with students, radiate positive feeling, create a positive emotional environment, use hope, optimism, and humor, maintain their own well-being. If you have a very unhappy teacher, then in front of a classroom, it's unlikely that that unhappy teacher will be able to joke and make students enjoy the class. I think it's important also to think about exciting cultural information that can be imparted so that students get a positive attitude towards the language and the culture, and to allow students to do autonomous activities. So to conclude about future directions in this field, I think it's important to keep using mixed methods designs, also to expand the range of time frames. So I explained that we did one over the course of one semester, but it would be interesting to see whether to see change over the course of a whole academic year, or even over the course of one single class. We need more statistical sophistication in the study, in the field, as well as intervention studies, so exploratory and experimental research. What is it that teachers can do? What technique could they use to boost enjoyment, control boredom and anxiety? That would be really, really useful. Looking also at enjoyment anxiety in first language classes and in classes where students have multiple foreign languages. It's crucial to link learner emotions with engagement, motivation, and teaching techniques. And I think that we are seeing also more and more studies coming on foreign language boredom. And then I'm also very interested in nonlinear relationships between emotions and performance. So more of something does not necessarily always imply a gradual increase. Here are some references, and if you are interested, I would please email me and I would be happy to send you the papers, or you can also find them on ResearchGate or academia.edu. Okay, thank you. I'd be happy to answer some questions now. I'll stop sharing my screen. That's it.
Thank you, Professor Dewaele. It was a wonderful talk. Maybe for the first time we have a talk based on empirical studies. We have seen statistics. Most of the statistics may be not comprehensible to us. Even then, the findings or the general issues that you touched upon must have created some curiosity in the audience. So I request to invite, questions, clarifications, or any other comments on the talk, please.
No, just one query. Is it that emotions are poorly studied? I mean, is it because of the dominance of the negative view of emotion? That emotions are, they are obstacles to rational thought. Is it still dominant, this view?
Yes. Well, I would say that there still is mistrust within the field of applied linguistics about emotions. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at psychology, you discover that there is a huge field of psychology research on emotions. This is typically very solid research. So a lot of psychologists are working on emotion. It's just kind of strange that not more applied linguists and foreign language teachers have become interested in it. And I remember that when I submitted my first papers on this topic, that I very often got very negative feedback from reviewers that, why should we be looking at this? Which is why I think it's important, if you do want to introduce something new to the field, that you have really solid evidence for it. So that's why I make sure that we have good statistical evidence that these emotions matter. That this is not a luxury. This is something that can make a difference. And if you are a committed teacher, then you want your students to do as well as possible. So it is in fact your duty to do well and to follow the literature on this.
To understand what emotion is or emotions are. And then also I think what I have understood from your talk, I mean, successful teaching demands a clear understanding of emotion and then also an ability to handle them the right way.
Yes.
And secondly, your talk has clearly shown that, emotions have a vital role in cognition, right?
The two are really linked.
Yeah. But my point was, we tend to believe that, it's intelligence that makes us humans. But I think we are human beings because of emotions also.
Absolutely.
So we have to develop an interest in emotion. I think that, thank you for, making aware of that. So after listening to your talk, I'm convinced that, we have to develop an interest in emotion. I mean, to understand better the human nature and human behavior.
Yeah, I think we could use the metaphor of brain and heart. So that both need to be engaged in the foreign language class. And Peter McIntyre and I have used also the metaphor of enjoyment being like the fuel that drives the acquisition, where the anxiety is really like the cold shower. You shiver and you remain silent and you hide. So teachers really need to create a positive emotional environment where students do not fear that they will be punished or ridiculed for making a mistake. I think that's really the crucial pedagogical implication of the research.
So thank you for making aware about this, the importance of emotional studies on emotion, right? Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hello, Professor Dewaele. Thank you so much for an enlightening talk. I actually do research on acoustics specifically, and also try to understand how people perceive language, specific information on language. So for example, say tone or intonation or any discursive meaning for that matter. I have a different sort of question actually. If that can be connected to the talk that you have delivered, when we talk, basically, we do also use some sort of expressions depending upon, like, while releasing, say, different sorts of emotion. When you narrate a story, say, for example, we do make some sort of facial expressions or hand gestures that would go along with the emotional release of the particular event. If we are happy, if we are sad, something like that. Now, if we try to look at it from, say, L1 and L2 perspective, do you believe that there would be some sort of changes? If so, like, do you believe that the L1 influence will also be carried down to the L2 kind of thing? So one way we are, of course, releasing the verbal expression. Similarly, we have some expressions that are non-verbal, but these are very much crucial in terms of releasing those emotional outbursts and so forth. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. In fact, I published a paper with Chris Moon Kyung earlier this year on emotion patterns of Korean foreign language learners of English, and whether they recognize, in fact, emotional intonation patterns. And apparently it's pretty different in Korean, where emotion is not so much communicated through intonation patterns as it is in English. And so we obtained data and showed that the Americans, a group of American L1 English control group, they reacted very strongly to emotional patterns in interpreting data, whereas the Koreans missed that completely. So there clearly is an L1 effect when you use emotions in a foreign language, in that you assume that the patterns that exist in your foreign language will also exist in that foreign language. And it takes a while before you realize that that is not necessarily always the case. Like, I realized also when I sat in my first staff meeting at Birbeck in 1994, I thought that my colleagues were all immensely polite and liked each other so much. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody was hitting the table with their fist, as I had seen in staff meetings back in Brussels. People were much more expressive. My British colleagues, they were all, so stiff upper-lipped, I couldn't believe it. And then I realized that I totally misinterpreted. A lot of them hated each other, but they would never raise their voice. They would never start moving their arms. The only thing you could see maybe was their eyebrow going slightly up, which was a sign of extreme anger, I realized. And it took me a couple of years before I kind of understood how the British communicate their emotions. And of course, it doesn't apply to all the British people, just the colleagues I met at university and in faculty meetings. So it took me a while to acculturate and to be able to read the situation correctly and to intervene also, and then in fact to have them understand what I was feeling. And because I was in the French department, I then very often used French to reverse the table. Because their French was good, but they did not have French as a first language.
Okay, so thank you. I would definitely like to go through your work. Just an additional question. Since you have already examined these things in Korean and English per se, was there any chance to also look at their, say, some of the biological changes in terms of, say, their pulses, if it carries some significant information, while in different, say, emotional situations, extremely happy, excited, angry? Did you try to measure, those changes, oximeter or pressure, something of that sort? This
is something we could do in the future, but we didn't manipulate that in that experiment.
Okay, actually, yeah, please go ahead.
No, go on.
Okay, so no, because I'm actually trying to look at something of similar sort. So that's what I'm trying to understand if they will. I believe there should be some sort of effect possibly. And one final question. So in that sense, you would believe that the facial expressions or like gestures will also have some sort of cognitive, explanation, the way people perceive, or if it is actually different from language to language, as you have seen in case of say British speakers and then the Korean speakers and so on per se. So there would be some.
Yes,
yeah.
I have published several papers with a former PhD student of mine, Pernelle Lorette, on how foreign language users interpret recordings of first language users.
Yes.
So listening to the tone of voice, watching facial expression, body language, and it turns out that foreign language users are typically quite good at identifying the emotion being portrayed if they have visual information. It is much harder if it's only audio information.
Yeah.
And I guess that also explains why it's also always more stressful to be on the phone using foreign language, because you don't see your interlocutor frowning or saying, "What? I didn't understand that. Could you repeat that?" So having a visual element is really important. It's like providing a crutch for emotion interpretation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm trying to go for a simple setup, just with a simple video recorder and possibly something like oximeters and pulsometers. So just try to control the external part to understand that thing. Thank you so much. I'll definitely look into the research that you have already published. Thank you.
Yeah, students, scholars, if you have anything to ask, share this opportunity. Yeah, so yes, this is one of the emotions maybe that we should get rid of.
Yes, it's important to realize that there is no such thing as stupid questions. That sometimes there are things that you had not thought of, and I think that what is true in the foreign language classroom is equally true in a PhD seminar or a workshop at a conference or a panel at a conference. That everybody is interested in this topic, and all questions are legitimate. There are no stupid questions.
I have Professor Dewaele, I have a stupid question to ask you.
Oh, please go ahead.
So we have created artificial intelligence, robots, but do you think in the future we can, create robots with emotions? Is the question clear to you?
No, could you repeat?
No, we have created artificial intelligence, robots. But in the future, do you think it will be possible to create, artificial intelligence with emotions?
I think it's going to be really hard. I'm not saying it would be impossible, but I think it's going to be really hard because of the irony. When is somebody sarcastic? When we know that when somebody laughs or smiles, it's not necessarily a happy laugh or smile. So I think that it will need a huge amount of intelligence to have machines read this right, because I think that even human beings often get it wrong. That sometimes even you may have a friend that you think you know, and you might miss a sarcastic remark, or you might think it's a joke, and then it turns out not to be a joke. And then you realize, oh God, I have to reinterpret what that friend said in the last half hour. I thought he was joking, but there is really something wrong with his marriage. So I think we're still some way off with artificial intelligence. And I think I would say that's probably also why we won't anytime soon be able to replace teachers with robots, with artificial intelligence. I think the students will want more than a stupid artificial intelligence in front of the class.
Yeah. So let us hope that it doesn't happen.
I'd be surprised. I mean, you could have a machine to test your, can you conjugate a verb or can you translate a text? I mean, yeah, machines can do that. But there will be a teacher who establishes a human connection with the students.
So let machines remain machines, let robots remain robots. I think that's better, good for us.
Amalesh,
in 2018, I attended a conference in Australia, Melbourne. So some researchers actually from Australia and USA, so in collaboration, they actually brought up a robot which was on display, and then they showcased its talent. So we were all surprised that the robot was actually able to answer sarcastically or even insult back to people. Some lady actually was called on the stage, and because the robot was bald, so the lady said, "Hey, don't you feel that you're bald and you are not like us, the human being?" The robot replied back, "Look at you, who is talking, you're fat lady. I still look so smart with my sunglasses on." So and that reaction time was just fractions of second. So when the robot was also asked for directions across different parts in Melbourne, it was able to tell it, and it could actually also identify if somebody was worried from the accent and all. So that kind of training the robot actually got. So the researchers at that point told that they were planning to install these kinds of robots on the roads to help out traffic issues, as well as to help out people with directions and some similar sorts of tasks. So incorporating some sorts of emotion, I think people have already done, but this is really worrisome, as Sarah has already pointed out, but this is still possible. AI has reached to that level actually, that can react to emotions or with emotions per se.
Well, I think what you say just proves how much more research could be done in the field of emotion and language and interpretation. It's such a huge and rich field, and it can be applied to so many different domains. So that's also why I kind of chose to work in this field. I love it to be working with psychologists and sociologists, but also talking with literature people who work on linguistic autobiographies of multilinguals who feel very different when they switch languages. And then, this is really helpful. I can see also that Subhashish Rasana asked a question about how do we decide what is positive and what is a negative emotion. I think that it really also always is very much context dependent and person dependent, meaning that there is never an absolute way to be sure that this is positive or negative. It really depends on the context. So you need to know the person, for example, to know whether that person is actually happy or unhappy, because some people show how they feel very easily in their faces and in their body languages. Other people are much more reserved, and you need to know them much better, in fact, to be able to read whether they are actually happy or unhappy. And maybe the fact, they can say just a single word to express how happy they are or how unhappy they are. But then other people, use 100 words to express their feelings. And so if you realize that they're only using 50 words instead of the usual 100, then maybe they are not as happy as they usually are. I would say that the computations that go on in your head are unique to every interactant you know, or you know that when your colleague who also speaks another language, that when he starts swearing in his L1, then he is really unhappy. But if he swears in the common language that you have with him, then that's okay. He's not really angry. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why the complexity is fascinating, and we should not expect that we can kind of come to some general rule that applies for everybody across languages and contexts.
Sir, we have a question from a student. He has written in the chat box, so let me read it out. Sir, how do we decide between positive and negative emotions?
Sarath, he answered that question, sir. He answered that question.
In fact, I just answered the question.
Okay, sir.
Yeah,
so we have one raised hand, and then...
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that it depends on the context, and it depends on the person. So there are no general rules.
Yeah, we have one raised hand, then I think we can call it a day. Aritra Mukherjee.
There are two raised hands, Sarath. Please allow them.
Okay, sir. Okay, right.
Thank you, Professor Dewaele, for your wonderful lecture. Actually, my question is partly an observation and partly a question, okay, based on the observation. In India, mostly, I'm talking about the English medium schools, where the primary mode of teaching is English. Okay. In these schools, I have seen during my own experience as a student and later as a teacher that there is more focus on literature produced in English. But most of the teachers throughout my life, I have seen that they teach English literature in a very technical, de-emotionalized fashion, where they give one information after another, like author's name, plot, character, this and that. But there is hardly any focus on the emotional world of the text, which, since it is not highlighted, the students generally feel a disconnect from the language and also the literature they are studying with. So my question to you is, how important is it to bring emotion in a literature class when you are teaching a language, a foreign language, through the literature primarily written in that language?
Yeah. Well, you can guess what my answer will be. The teacher is not a robot, meaning that the teacher needs to be engaging. The teacher should be creating an atmosphere where people are excited, challenged, where they hear things they had not expected before, where they laugh because the teacher is silly or is joking, where everybody is enjoying themselves, and where it's great to be part of that group, where you are proud of belonging to that group. And I think that whatever it is that you teach, you can do that. And literature is wonderful to do that, because, all the things that you can imagine, we're asking students, well, would you do the same thing? Would you react differently? How would you write this paragraph? And I think, I'm trying to do the same when I'm talking about my research. I think it's wonderful, interesting, and I try to communicate this to you and to the students in the hope that some of you may want to pick up applied linguistics, and, you could go and do research on anything you want. My deeper message is that doing research is amazing, that in fact being with students is amazing, is a privilege, and that we should make sure that we do the best possible job we can. And I'm not claiming that we should all be happy and that we should ignore the fact that for some teachers, it can be tough if you if your teaching load is too heavy, if you're underpaid, if you are ill, if you have health issues. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I think that the moment you enter the classroom, it is your sacred duty to make sure that your students learn something and that they are moved by what it is that you bring to them. And I think you can move students as much with linguistics, how did the language evolve, as with issues to do with multilingualism. How do you communicate, or with beautiful literary texts or songs? So, I mean, it's wonderful to be a teacher. I love it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, we have a question from Joey. Maybe this one is the last.
Yes, I can see it there about shame. Yes, and accents. Yes, and yes, humiliating students in class is really the very, very worst thing that can happen. Sometimes you may have some students humiliating other students, and I immediately intervene. I stop it straight away. Oh, no. This is totally wrong. An accent is part of a person's image as much as the color of their eyes or their hair or the color of their skin. Everybody has different accents, and that's fine. If we understand what it is they're saying, then the accent is not a problem. And I myself have a foreign accent in English. I'm perfectly happy with that foreign accent because I'm not a British person. I've lived here for a long time, but I'm Belgian. I'm happy to be Belgian. It doesn't stop me from contributing to British society. Nobody has ever criticized me for my accent. I mean, people are listening to what I have to say, not to how I say it, if they understand what it is I'm saying. So, yeah, and I agree that teachers really need to address issues of shame, and that these are things that we need to write about. And I do write about this, in fact, because it is also very much linked to the concept of the native speaker, and I haven't talked about that. It's a concept that I absolutely hate. I think it is absolutely toxic. I think that we should be talking about foreign language users, and that we should not expect our students to sound like American or British users of English. I love Indian English. So there is no need for Indians not to sound like Indians. And the same obviously applies to people from different regions of India with different accents. I mean, it's just like you have a diversity of taste in Indian food. You have a diversity of accent in Indian English. It's lovely. So it's just a matter of not seeing the fact of not being like a norm of a native speaker, but to see that deviation from the norm can be perfectly okay. And hence you can have pride in your own uniqueness.
Yeah, we have one more question, but then I request Shubhasis Prasanna to write his question to Professor Dewaele personally. I will give you the email address later on. This brings us to the conclusion of the program. I have a list of people who made this event possible. It's not comprehensive, so I might miss out quite a lot of names. First of all, we offer a sincere gratitude to Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele for giving us this opportunity to listen to him. His speech has given us a variety of ideas related to emotion studies in language learning. Scholars in the field of English language education must have benefited a lot from the talk. Then we also thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor of our university for his presence and encouragement in spite of a very tight schedule. It's quite hectic these days because of NAT preparation and other issues in the university. He has been very supportive, extremely supportive of academic events. This was one of the, one in the list. We also thank Professor Gautam Kumar Bora, our dear head of the department, for all his help and motivation. It was because of him that this event was possible. And we offer our gratitude to all the faculty members of the department and elsewhere, Professor Danta sir, Professor Farhina ma'am, Dr. Go Pallavi, the Hemjutiba, Dr. Mahapatra sir, so all of them, and everybody, all right, who I might have missed. Then finally, we must also thank the students of the university and the department and elsewhere. You made a great audience today. Before we sign off, let me share this, that we have another talk on emotion studies coming up this week by Dr. Tirtha Prasad Mukhopadhyay of University of Gaziantep, Mexico. He will speak on Natya Shastra and emotion studies next Saturday. Right. Once again, Professor Jean-Marc Dewaele, we thank you. We will send you a formal letter of gratitude to you later on. So with this, we close the program today. Thank you all. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Dewaele. Yeah, we'll keep this one alive. We'll keep this one alive.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you and goodbye.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye, sir.
Professor Bora.